here we go. Hooray. Okay. So, Peter, I'm so glad you could play today. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you're up to in life?
It's a very long story. I'm 85, and I have to, in order to cover the story meaningfully, I have to go back to the Second World War. When I was 9, my parents left school at 13 and 14. They never owned a Bible. They wanted me to be better educated than they were. And they sent me to a Baptist Sunday school, where I went on my own during the war, walking along a main road. But I didn't dislike it. And I kept going. I must have been questioning some things, because the week before I was 14, there was a lesson on the Trinity, and it was a flannel graph. I don't know if anyone remembers what they are. The little fuzzy belts, and they had one with Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Talked about the 3 discs separately, then put one on top of the other, and said, "There you are. That's how 3 is 1." I've often wished that I could recall the conversation or the comment I made as I left that room that afternoon, because it was along the lines of, "That was a lot of rubbish, wasn't it? I'm glad I don't have to come next week."
It's a perfect 14-year-old thing. Go ahead.
And that was it. I spent 2 years in the Royal Air Force, and that was interesting too, because that was where I had my first contact with race discrimination amongst Americans. I was one of 150 Brits on an American USAF Air Force base in Mildenhall, where there were over 2,000 Americans. I used to play table tennis with one of the blacks, dare I say, and one of the whites. On one occasion, the white came in and saw me playing with the black, and he never played with me again.
Oh my gosh.
That was probably in 1954. Here we go. I had difficulty as soon as that was almost an aside, wasn't it? And I've lost my train of thought.
So the table tennis white guy didn't play with you again?
No. Anyway, so after I finished my national service, I had difficulty getting a job, but I then went to London and stayed with some people, and I'd only been there 3 weeks when I was joining a social club and met Ken, who was running a cup pack on his own at an Anglican church where the average congregation was in excess of 250 every week. I had rejected the Trinity. I knew nothing, but I offered to help Ken. And that's how I came in contact with the Church of England, and how everything, my whole life revolved around that particular church, which was very, very family oriented. It's where I met my wife. And one disconcerting story, which is not insignificant, is that when I went to, had confirmation, through confirmation, I was staying with a Plymouth Brethren family, and this was one evening, and I got back that evening, and I asked, she asked me, "Where have you been?" And I told her. She was furious. She said, "It's late tonight, but I want you out first thing in the morning." So there was one of my experiences of the wrong side of Christianity. It so happened that the new curate, who had arrived in the parish 3 weeks after me, was staying with a lady who had a spare room. I moved in. So Ken and I became friends because he didn't know anyone and I didn't know anyone. Cut a long story short, Reg was my best man. 3 weeks after, we moved away after the wedding, and 3 weeks afterwards, we went back to visit my wife's mother. And Reg spoke to me and he said, "Peter," he said, now you're married and moved away. He said, "You don't need my friendship any longer." That was the curate. In other words, for the year or so that I had known him, he was my friend because he had to be. And I learned years later that he had been taught in theological college that it is dangerous to have friends in the parish in which you are working.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh, it's heartbreaking. Yes.
Now, for somebody who is an extreme introvert, who for a long time was thinking Asperger syndrome, but only in the last 12 years. I was introduced to the idea of Asperger's 12 years ago. I had no other friends other than my wife. And he said that. We moved to right away to Southampton, and we joined the parish church, which was almost run down. We joined the congregation on a Sunday morning, and we were two of an average congregation of 9. The vicar had been a missionary in Nigeria, and he was a fish out of water. But he and I got on extremely well. Barbara and I started running a cutback, and that was when I realized that I'm quite a good listener, because he was crying on my shoulder. He didn't have enough work to do in the parish, and so he became a prison chaplain as a sideline. Barbara's mother had multiple sclerosis, which meant that we had to move. Well, it was either mother went into a home or we took her in, which we did. It worked for over 5 years before she died. When we moved to that parish, with her, we'd had to move. I contacted the local scout group, and I said, "Look, I want to because I wanted to help. They made it very clear that they did not want anybody attached to the Anglican Church with doing anything with the Scouts.
No. Wow.
3 months later, the vicar suggested to me that I might become the treasurer of the church. I had no accounting experience, and I was only in my sort of mid-20s. I said, well, I don't know. He didn't know, but he said the current treasurer is leaving the district, and he would train you over the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, great, here's something else I could learn.
Yeah.
And I was treasurer of that church for 8 years. The vicar was, had been during the war, the principal of the theological college in Mauritius. He was an academic. And on one occasion, I asked him if he could explain the Trinity to me.
Oh, no.
Peter, he said, greater minds than mine have struggled with that for years. I just have to accept what they say. A few weeks later, he was appointed the Bishop of Mauritius. And I found myself thinking, how can a bishop in the Church of England not understand the Trinity or explain it? Yeah. He subsequently became an archbishop.
Wow.
The Archbishop of the Indian Ocean.
Wow.
But then I became disillusioned with Christianity, or what I was hearing, because I couldn't get answers to my questions. And, well, things weren't right. But then I lost my job, and we moved. And we moved to Brighton, where we've lived ever since. I got involved with the Anglican Church here, and it transpired that the vicar's wife was a lapsed Catholic. He retired early the following year, and by then I'd had enough. But in the meantime, I'd seen an advert in the Reader's Digest for a magazine called The Plain Truth, published by the Worldwide Church of God. If anyone remembers the name Herbert Armstrong, that was it. It was a glossy magazine that was published every month, and at one time had a circulation of 8 million around the world. I got caught up in it, and it was a Christian church, a Christian organization. It rejected Christmas and Easter as pagan festivals and rejected the Trinity as conventionally taught. So you can see what drew me.
Mm-hmm.
Because as treasurer of the church, I was well aware of who was donating regularly and how many people came at Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
Eventually, I was baptized, and we had one in 1970. This was 1976. In 1977, I was going to church on a Saturday because it was a Sabbath-keeping church with my son. Mm-hmm. And my wife was going on Sundays to the Anglican Church with our daughter. Fast forward to 1995, and that church split because they had to they wanted to be recognized in the States. This was based in California. And in order to get accreditation, they had to have people with doctorates on their staff.
Mm.
So they sent 3 of their senior ministers to Azusa. Is it Fuller? Does that mean anything to Fuller College?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they went there, and within 3 months, they were reporting back and saying there's something wrong with our theology.
Oh, no.
That was in 1991. In 1995, the church split.
Oh.
Our own little church had a congregation of about 90. It split into 3. One stayed with the original teaching. The third moved on with the new, and the other third, just as far as we can make out, gave up completely. It destroyed our own family of 14, related by marriage. And my daughter was married to one of the other, the son of one of the other members. And with the split, basically, she said to me quite reasonably, Dad, she said, you can't both be right. And they gave up. They were youth leaders, and they just gave up. And they both became atheists. So I was on my own. One of the things I haven't said anything about was the way I had been made redundant 4 times. Redundant 3 times. And I'd been out of work since 1990. And so I had a computer, which I bought with my redundancy money. And that's how when I started studying. Up until then, I'd always been a workaholic. My work had been, for 20 odd years, had been as a computer programmer. And computer programming was the perfect job for somebody with Asperger's.
Yes.
And we didn't know it.
Right.
But you see how I've been very isolated in so many ways. And after the split, which my wife has never accepted, she still attends what's left. And we don't see eye to eye. She is still convinced that Jesus will return and that everything will be okay. I've gone on rather longer than I intended, but it's just come out.
It's great.
From 1998, bearing in mind I'd been using the internet for a year, I suddenly had a sense of freedom and liberation from the slavery of legalism.
Yes. When was that?
1998.
Oh, yes, you broke through.
By 2000, I was very involved with the house church movement. By 2003, I was really involved with the emerging and emergent church. It was 2003 when I found the beginnings of a book by Wayne Jacobson, So You Don't Want to Go to Church Anymore, which obviously is, I mean, this is a well-known book. And he and his partner had only written 3 chapters at the time. I carried on there with the God Journey, which was the podcast that he was producing, and that's really, I felt totally at home by then. And then in 2007, and this is very significant, Paul Young wrote to Wayne Jacobson, sending him a transcript of what subsequently became The Shack.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd seen the story of The Shack with its, 20 million copies or more, published in 2008. I read it in 2007 because it was published privately.
Mm-hmm.
There were 200 or 300 of us on that news group where we were discussing all of this, where Paul Young was himself a regular contributor.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, at that point, been in touch with another person who is now well known on the web, but I knew him locally, and that's Andre Raby. And he made some comments to me, and I thought, I don't understand. If he's right, he's talking about something that I'm not ready for. It was some years later, looking back, that I realized that he was partly right, but he missed something. Right. Now we come on to, by 2010, I was, how can I put it? I'd been introduced to Richard Holloway, who was the former leader of the Episcopal Church in Scotland. And he had been completely disillusioned by the Lambeth Conference and walked away. And then in 2012, Diana Butler Bass wrote a book called Christianity After Religion. And that was a major turning point, because all of what I had been doing made me realize that I had this awareness of evangelicalism and what it meant in America. It wasn't the same in Europe. It wasn't quite so strict severe. But from that point on, I realized that I was learning so much about the way in which evangelicalism, and particularly fundamentalism, was destroying people.
Mm-hmm.
Fear, guilt, and shame. And that is what I saw.
Yes, sir.
And so this was 2012. And it's been a very different journey since then, because it was in 2013 that I joined the local branch of University of the Third Age. Bearing in mind I'd left school at 16, I had never had any further formal education, but I joined this group, and over the next 4 years, I attended classes for philosophy, psychology, counseling, the history of Christianity, the history of religion, Buddhism, and Islam. Only 3 or 4 hours a week, but over a period of 4 years. And the person who had been the most influence on that at that time was Barbara Brown Taylor. Shall I stop there? Because there's only one major thing that I would want to talk about after that as an introduction. And that was a little bit later. That was in 2019. All right. Shall I go? I'll carry on.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. And Barbara Brown Taylor wrote a book entitled Holy Envy. That, to me, summed up everything. And it was only about 2 or 3 months later, somebody on Facebook posted, there were 2 posts that one was, "This is what I used to believe." And he had been a Pentecostal and he had been very active for 30 years. The following day, he posted another set of comments saying, "This is what I now believe." And he is now an Anglican. It took a few months for the whole thing to come together, but those 2 posts sum up his journey from evangelicalism to a turning point and becoming an Anglican. And I realized that that turning point for him was where I started 60 years previously. I had gone completely Anglican. Then with the church split, I'd been introduced to what he had known for 30 years. And that's how I really came to appreciate the whole significance of evangelicalism, especially in America. Mm. And needless to say, I've watched everything with Trump ever since. And anyone who's listening might wonder, what's this got to do with mysticism? Well, that was the foundation on which I suddenly came to realize that it had all been head knowledge and not heart awareness. I got that sense in 2006, but I didn't really put it together. Well, the 13 years. In all that time, I've had a blog. Well, it started as a website, came into a blog, and over a period of about 12 years, I realized that I'd been able to share something of the journeys of over 2,000 people who had been drawn away from churches that they may have attended for many years. And a not insignificant number of those were leaders. This was particularly true around after the publication of the Shack. But more recently, I've been almost a recluse. Not out of choice, but because I've been seeing things from a different perspective, and I can't easily express anything more. Yeah, I've given you a pretty clear, hopefully a good picture of the journey that I've been on. I just sense that I have enough awareness that I have a blog which has hundreds of questions indirectly, and where I feel that I can talk to anybody who has been through the mill of what I like to refer to as Christendom. And I got quite a lot of material about that, because I was at one time also in contact with the Anabaptists. And one of the interesting things about the Anabaptists is that at the time of the Reformation, they were ostracized by both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm right in saying that 3 of the Anabaptists were actually martyred no more than 10 miles from where I live. How do I share this with others? That's where I am now, wondering how I can do. At 85, I'm stuck. I'm stuck where I am with a wife who is disabled. But I still have the internet, and I have had for over 20 years.
When you say, how do I share this? What is the core of what you'd like to share?
That is my what I have come to recognize is that people don't understand the meaning of the word God. I think that's an absolutely basic thing to consider. I think you've seen the introduction to my blog, and that is what it's all about. What do we understand by the word God? And I've been able to write it over a long period of time, a lot of things for people to consider. And I've long had a reputation amongst a few friends. Peter, you have this knack of asking the awkward questions to which there are no easy answers. And that's what it's all about as far as I'm concerned. I've got nothing that I want to teach anyone. I've been through all of this. I've said a lot about the journey that I've had, and that's raised no end of questions. And I put all these questions together in a 4 or 5 pages on my blog in 2005. That's history now, but it's a good indication of part of the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So you share your questions, and you share the journeys of many, like 2,000 people, and your the core of what you want to say is like, can we open to who is God?
Can we share our thoughts openly? There was a time when my blog was seen as a safe haven by 20 or 30 people, but that was a long time ago, and we've all gone our different ways. I'm still in touch with a few people that I knew earlier, but you wouldn't recognize I don't recognize their journeys now. But that's life, and that is the way we only see very small parts. And all right, I'm an extreme introvert. I'm certainly not shy, and I've never been afraid of expressing my thoughts. And that's got me into serious trouble at times.
Yeah.
And one thing, I mean, that one thing I do quite often comment on is that I got into serious trouble when I was 15. When at school, I dared to suggest that the British Empire was built on greed and selfishness.
Mm-hmm.
I was 15. Well, there was nothing much in the history books like there is now to reinforce that. And that's one of my foundations. And as a Brit, that doesn't go down well even now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, that's what empire is, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's all crumbling. British Empire has fallen. What's happening to America?
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. But then it does seem sometimes that, I only see the black side of things. But realistically, I suppose I've got this ability to watch what's going on. I came to understand a lot more of how I am as a person when I got to know about the Enneagram, 3 or 4 years ago. And at one time I thought I was a type 5. No, I'm an observer. I'm a type 9, but with a fair bit of 4 and 5 in it, using that as a tri-type. But the real emphasis on my thinking now comes from spiral dynamics.
Yeah.
But that's just a separate story, isn't it?
Oh, I want to hear that story. Spiral dynamics.
And just seeing how it all fits together, the place of religion and spirituality, the particular level, moving through the levels. And I realized I've been doing that without knowing anything about it.
Isn't
And
that
being
amazing?
able to relate. But interestingly, I can't relate to anything below blue. Does that make sense?
So, is it because when you look back, when do you feel like you could when you were blue in your development? How old were you?
It started, that development of blue started by accident, or call it what you will. That it was I began my adult life being drawn into the church,
Yeah.
but not as a believer. It was because I was helping with the scouts, and I said, my thinking was quite simply, the boys have to attend church parade once a month. I really ought to know what it's all about. And I started attending. And it so happened, as I had this curate who was new to the parish and took me under his wing. And that was it.
Yeah.
I remember asking him why he was an Anglican. He said, well, I think it's better than being a Methodist, but I can't take it any further than that. And all of these things, life has been a succession of examples of the misguided direction of Christianity or religion generally. And spirituality is something quite different, isn't it?
Yes, sir. So I'd like to hear that. What is spirituality in your lived experience?
I'm sorry.
What is spirituality in your lived experience?
It's an awareness of what to me is the reality of everything is spiritual. The way that I would sum it up would be it all came together for me with Rob Bell and his 2-hour presentation of Everything is Spiritual, where he started with the Big Bang and talked right through the development of everything. That there is this, forgotten the word. So can I think? There's a word I want to use and I can't think of it. No, word's gone.
Okay. So Rob Bell talks about the development of everything is spiritual from the Big Bang on.
From the Big Bang, everything is a development from there.
Yeah.
And so that it is that something within. It's that heart awareness, and I don't like that word, but that was what the difference between head knowledge and heart awareness. Perhaps let me use something that came to mind the other day. When I stopped attending church in 2009, the one thing that I missed, and the only thing I really missed, was communion. But at that time, I already had my own understanding of what communion was. It wasn't the sacrifice of Jesus. It was the reality of God's Spirit. Because what I had gained right from the beginning with my rejection of the Trinity was that Jesus was not God. Jesus left his Spirit with us, and that it's God's Spirit that is within that guides all that we say and do, if we are open to it. And it's not a very good explanation, but it's the nearest I can get without sort of thinking it anymore. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does. Beautiful. So if I did the math right, it's 2019 that you really had a shift, because you said it was 13 years after something.
Yeah, it was that it was at that point, not so much that anything changed, but that I recognized where the journey that I've been, it was a description of the journey that I've been on, that it started off as an Anglican, and I moved right through. I was at one point, the vicar wanted me to train as a lay reader, and that was interesting because he was an expert on the Old Testament, and he persuaded me to attend one of his classes for others who were actually going to for training, and this was a course on the Old Testament. And many years later, I was looking through my notes and I realized that he started at Genesis 12 because he ignored the myth and symbolism of the first 11 chapters. And after 8 weeks, we had got to the second chapter of Exodus. That was the depth of his study. That was his. That was it. But yeah.
Wow.
Genesis 12 is the effective beginning of the Old Testament. Let's ignore the myth and symbolism. And I mean, he was right in one sense. That yes, it is myth. I understand the myth and symbolism of Genesis in much the same way as C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. They were that makes total sense to me. They didn't know any different in those days. But these are comments from somebody who has no formal education in that field. And which I suppose reminds me of the closest friendship that I've ever had on the web was with Dave, who had written an article. I got to know him, and yeah. Sorry, I've been talking too long. I've completely, my mind has just gone for the moment. No. Perhaps we can stop for a minute. I can't get back to where I was.
Okay. You were talking about your close friendship with Dave, whose last name I don't know.
Yeah.
And he wrote an article.
And that's how we got to know each other. And he was a preacher. And he, there was one occasion when he was writing, and he ended up by saying, I haven't written like that for ages, but you just bring something out of me. And I subsequently found out that he died of a stroke within an hour or so, probably within an hour of him writing that to me. And when I mentioned it to my wife, I said, I've just lost my best friend. She said, who you've never met, because he was in the States.
Yeah.
But Dave had been saying that he was a preacher and that he thought of me as a prophet. And I didn't like that at all, because that I didn't understand what he was getting at. But he said, Peter, he said, you've got a way of expressing things that enable me to put into words my thoughts to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that's what it's been for with a few people, only a few. But yes, this is where I've been asking the questions,
Mm-hmm.
and making comments, you know, the rise and fall of empires, and you know, how life has been ongoing. These are all things that I picked up from Christian, some secular, and some other spiritual aspects. And yes, I'm just an observer, and I don't know what else to say like that. No.
Yeah, you know, it's a theme of this observing, of course, is a theme. And what I notice is you have from an early age a dedication to what's real, what's going on here, what's really going on here.
Yeah.
Not just oh, don't worry about it.
Yeah. We're going the wrong way in so many ways, and easily misunderstood. But one of the problems that I see is so much mindlessness in the world, where people don't know what's going on and don't want to. Sport and other things like that, and holidays, they are the things that people think about. And that has nothing to do with the real meaning of life.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of thing you can't express to many people. And is this the sort of thing that by being able to talk to people who are in leadership positions and just generally discussing things, maybe I can throw out some of these thoughts to people who have never thought of that particular aspect of life or the place of spirituality. I don't know. I know I have encouraged a number of people who have left church to go their own ways. Yes, because they have. We're all in the same position. We learn as we go along, and we don't like cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of that there that has to be understood and accepted.
Yes. So by temperament or whatever you'd want to say, you've lived so bravely in continuing to question and wonder and ask and open to what's beyond most people's conception of the world. And I was going to say, you've been so brave, you've been so courageous, because it has people fall away. It has the effects that you've experienced throughout your life. And it's interesting to see, you have the temperament for that. It's like, well, you're an extreme introvert. You're not so focused on the other people's opinions, needing to conform with that. So like you're just right for the job that you're doing, for the quest that you're in.
that's almost how I feel. Yeah, I think this is it. You've hit the nail on the head there. Feeling able to do this, and we're getting close to what it is that I would want to be able to do, but I haven't been able to do it because I'm not in touch with people who could benefit from that. But then I've been very much on my own. I mean, I haven't had a full-time job for 30 years. I was made redundant in 1990. Excuse me. It's a brief moment. Sorry about that.
All good.
Yeah.
So you haven't had a full-time job in 30 years?
No. And I only had a part-time job for 5 years after that. So I've had no employment for over 25 years, which means that so I've had the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do almost for all that time, subject to certain limitations. We've got our own house, and I've always been a fanatical gardener, and because I've been involved with computers for all that time, I've been able to use the PC. My wife and I even used to teach the over 50s to use computers.
Nice.
We were trained by Age Concern with the national organisation in the UK to teach people, because the youngsters couldn't teach because they did, oh, you just do it this way.
Right.
Whereas we, as 50 plus nearly 60, we were teaching people in their 50s, 60s and 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite student was an 82-year-old retired shorthand typist whose whole family were in Australia, and one of her grandchildren was getting married. So she had two photos of the wedding within a couple of hours of the end. Now, but those photos took 30 minutes to be transmitted. I was at one time able to get hold of computers for £100, and then I would loan them out to my students. And at the end of the year, I'd say, they're yours. These were reconditioned ones by the local council. And dial up, no antivirus, no nothing. We were involved in that for a couple of years, and that was in the build-up to the millennium. Just one of the things that I, as a workaholic, I got involved with.
Right.
And yes, I've always been busy, and it wasn't until I was until 1990 when I got my computer that I really started to do anything in the way of education, other than I landed myself as a job as a computer programmer at the age of 30, and life just went on from there.
Amazing. Amazing. So what's your everyday life like now?
A little bit difficult, because I'm having to think of my wife. I can spend as much time as I want to on work, and I do. I probably even now spend too much time on Facebook. But I don't post there. I make comments, but it's my way of finding people to get in touch with.
Yeah.
And yeah, the last 6 weeks, I have been working very hard to get my blog into a state where I can lead it. And I think I've done that over the last couple of weeks. I've got to the point where 30 years of blogging, it's all there.
Wow.
There's more than enough autobiographical, so the sort of things I've been talking about. I've been able to write. I've got a lot of the older material is the sort of thing that people who are new to this journey out of evangelicalism, that I know that over the years that's been helpful to people who started just a short way on the journey. And this was written 15, 16 years ago, and it's still, people still look at it occasionally, get occasional looks at it.
Mm-hmm.
And usually if people look at one, they'll look at the 5.
Nice.
And yeah.
Yeah.
But my focus now is trying to encourage people to think, what do you really understand by the word God? Because if you don't understand that, what does your faith mean? But this is where there's a separation, isn't it, between spirituality and theory or religion. How many more people like me have come in without any significant spiritual depth? How many people you hear of many people who are struggling, desperate, they are introduced to church, and they become fully committed to something, but it doesn't eventually hold water because it's all physical, it's academic, and the spiritual depth is just not there. For other people, well, I think the hardest thing must be for evangelicals, or children of evangelicals who are brought up within the family, and they sense that there is that something, but it goes completely against so much of their parents' understanding. They are the people who need a sounding board. They need to be able to share their questions in a completely open way, and not have to worry about what they say, mm-hmm. and what might appear to be ridiculous questions. This is the sort of area that I feel comfortable with, purely because I suppose I've developed this answering a question with a question.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I really believe that there's so many now in that conversation. You were ahead of your time. There's so many that are questioning and asking and coming out of the box, and it's wonderful for you to have that information and to be willing to have the conversations.
Well, all of this really stems from around about 2001, 2002, when there was a very definite grouping of what many of us called the out of church Christians. And we talked about the tens of thousands of people who were going through this. I mean, Brian McLaren was very much on the beginning of this. I mean, and that was in the late 80s. And I caught up with him at a conference in 2004. But it is so many more, and it's gone from news groups to blogging to podcasts, and now we're getting, am I being unkind or not? There are so many people now who are they are aware that their role is to produce a series of podcasts. It's surely the same as people who were really drawn to some of the spiritual things and wrote one or two books. And then their publishers said, well, what's the next one? And people became full-time authors. I'm concerned that there are so many full-time bloggers who just want to get enough people subscribing that they can do it full-time. This is the way in which people get hooked on one person. And that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I look back, I could name 3 or 4 people who had a big impact, but the real impact for me has come not from 1 or 2 people, but from at least a dozen. And when I look occasionally at Facebook and the friends that I knew a few years ago, and I see that they have a number of friends now that I knew then or I know now. And it's got a wonderful potential for real network.
Mm-hmm.
But does it happen very often? I don't know. Is this something that I can be involved with? I've tried in the past to open up to safe havens. It's worked for a few months. You might get 8 or 9 people, and then we all go off on our different ways. There are a few, but am I being realistic? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Certainly the need is there. Certainly the need is there.
The need is, yes, I'm sure. I know the need is there. And all right, I'm over on the other side of the pond, but I've watched American politics since 2015 in particular. I may be wrong, but I've always doubted whether Trump ever wanted to be president.
Yeah.
I think he wanted to stir things up, and unintentionally found himself out on top. And when he realized that, then he went for it, really went for it. I could be wrong, but that's just that's just an observation from somebody outside. Yeah.
It's been fascinating. Yes. So when you were thinking about, because we talked about having this interview for a while, and when you were thinking about it, is there anything else that you wanted to share or encourage folks in their journey that we haven't talked about?
I'm sure I'll think of something afterwards, but no, I'd made a few notes. I'll be honest, I'm feeling quite exhausted.
Yes. Okay. So we'll bring it to a close. Peter, if people want to be in touch, or how can they be? And can you tell me your blog information for them on the video?
Yeah, it's outside the goldfish bowl. Yeah, it is silly.
It's so awesome. Outside the goldfishbowl.com.
No, WordPress.wordpress.com.
And if they want to be in touch directly, should they just contact you through Facebook or?
I don't like using. Never really liked using Facebook. I do prefer email.
Okay. Which
that's old Pete 76 at gmail.com. I've got a link to that on the blog.
Wonderful. Old Pete 79 at gmail.
No, 76.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad I read it back. Old Pete 76 at gmail.com. Okay. Peter, thank you so much. It's so generous of you to invest. I know that you're busy with your wife. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and sharing and your heart of giving.
Well, it's very much a case of I appreciate the fact that you asked me, because that in itself was a real challenge. And yes, I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have talked like this easily, even 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was the fact that I've been thinking about it without dwelling, because how can you dwell on something which is so vast?
Yes.
We only see small parts.
Yes.
And if my thoughts and questions or comments can be of any help to anyone, great. That's what it's all about.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.